Net Wealth Investments Limited is licensed to provide general advice. Our podcasts are not tailored to any one financial situation and may contain views of our presenters which may not align with Net Wealth's. The guest's organisation and Net Wealth have an arrangement for their financial products to be available for investment through the Net Wealth platforms, and Net Wealth may receive fees from the guest. More information about Net Wealth can be found on our website, including our financial services guide and disclosure documents. Please seek professional advice before acting.
Hi, I'm Matt Heiner, Joint Managing Director of Net Wealth, and welcome to Between Meetings. In this podcast series, I chat to industry professionals and thought leaders on what made their careers successful and the opportunities and challenges they see on a wide range of topics as they relate to the delivery of advice and financial services. I hope you enjoy their unique insights. In this episode, Senator Andrew Bragg shares his thoughts on a wide range of topics, including what drew him into politics, how he took on tech giants Google and Facebook earlier this year, and what we need to do to make super work more effectively. During the discussion, we also delve into cryptocurrency and the need for regulation to protect consumers, whilst also providing choice. As always, I hope you enjoy the discussion. If the sound quality isn't up to its usual standard, we apologise. Unfortunately, as many of you would be, we're working from home and had to record this episode via Teams. Senator Bragg, welcome to the show.
Hey, mate, how are you?
Really well. Appreciate you joining me. I know that it's a very busy time for you, and particularly with everything going on in the world, I have no doubt that this is going to be a very interesting discussion.
Well, it's good to be talking to my Victorian brethren. Of course, my life started down there in Victoria, and have to say I've watched with great regret what's happened in Melbourne over the last 12 months. But it seems now both sort of big cities are in a similar position.
Absolutely, and I did notice that you're originally born in Carlton. When did you move up to Sydney?
Well, yeah, so I think I was born at the Royal Women's Hospital there. I'm not sure if is it still there?
It is, yeah, opposite St Vincent's, I believe.
Yeah, so that's where I started, and then I grew up in Shepparton, which is up in Northern Victoria. I was there in Shepparton and Ngambie, and I grew up in country Victoria, so I played a lot of country footy and fishing. I mean, I was always sort of a bit of a skinny kid. So my dad used to say, it was good when you were good when you got the ball, but your problem was you couldn't get the ball very much. So my main interest when I was a kid was sort of fishing and football. Yeah.
Fantastic. I was actually reflecting on the last decade this morning when I was doing a little bit of reading on what you've achieved particularly over the last 12 months, but also over the last 10 years. And I think we first crossed paths in around 2013 when you were the policy manager at the FSC. So I think before we move on to some of the other topics, really interested to know how you actually moved from, I think you're an accounting major, doing internal audit at EY through the FSC to deciding that politics was your ultimate calling.
Yeah, so I went to uni in Canberra and I did international relations and accounting. And then I went to EY, and I was in internal audit, and they didn't like me, and I didn't really like them all that much. I wasn't very good at conforming, but I did learn a lot about risks and controls and governance from that period of internal audit, which is, I guess, has served me quite well in other things I've on to do. I was at the FSC for 7 years, and that was a good experience. It was, management experience and a lot of interesting dynamics. I would say I worked really hard in those years. I remember that I'd get into the office, and I knew it was early because the bloke who made my kind of scrambled eggs wasn't available yet. So I used to see the sort of the sun come up sometimes at work, and then I guess I sort of quit there with the view that I'd try and get into federal politics, and that's always hard getting in. And it took me a couple of cracks, and I sort of got in on the third go. And I was I never wanted to be an apologist for wanting to be in politics, and it didn't really matter that much. Which district in particular I represented at the time. I was more interested in making a policy contribution, I guess, to be frank, which I've tried to sort of make a start on in these first 2 years.
Okay, so Do you think that your interest in policy started at the FSC, where you really saw the impact of what you were working on at the time?
So my interest in policy and politics came from my father. He ran the Northern Victorian fruit growers and was involved in fruit growing policy in Northern Victoria. And he would come home and talk about tax and trade and water policy. And then ultimately the involvement that he had with the SPC cannery, which is the Shepparton Preserving Company, was, I think, quite critical. I mean, that was basically a case in the early 90s where the cannery had been closed down by extortionate labour union demands on wages. And I mean, the SPC at the time was a co-op run by the growers. And I guess I was concerned that the vested interests of a few could triumph over the interests of the many, being the members of the town. And I guess that attracted me to the Liberal Party. I mean, I'm the first person in my family to have joined our political party since my family migrated to Australia. So,
and since you've joined the Senate, you've certainly had a big impact, and you've worked on a number of committees and also chaired a number of committees across a whole wide range of different topics. Of those ones, which ones have you enjoyed the most? I mean, from my perspective, I'm going to be interested in the fintech review and also some of the work that you're doing on crypto. But where do you feel you've had the biggest impact in your time serving so far?
Well, probably the biggest impact was the result of me having to break my Christmas holiday this year when I was called in to participate in the Senate Economics Committee review of the Media Bargaining Code laws. Now, the Media Bargaining Code laws are a set of laws designed to get Google and Facebook to pay for public interest journalism. Now, people may remember over the Christmas holidays that Google and Facebook had threatened to turn off Australia, to leave Australia. And the moment, Matt, that a company threatens a country like Australia, I mean, the country had to win. I mean, Australia wasn't going to be beaten by Google. I mean, maybe a small country, but I mean, Australia is the 12th biggest economy on earth. We're a vibrant liberal democracy. We're not going to get, bashed out by a company. It doesn't matter who it is. And so I think we turned around that public debate on that issue and we won that. And now media organisations are being paid by big tech companies in effectively a world first. So where I think we're going to go with the penetration of big tech into our society is more regulation rather than less. So that's probably one instance where I think that intervention was hopefully helpful. But in a more day-to-day sense, my main interest has been in chairing the FinTech Committee and now the Tech Committee, which is looking at things like crypto.
I remember reading, obviously, all the articles around the big tech discussions, and I remember thinking at the time I would have loved to have been in the room with Josh Frydenberg, Mark Zuckerberg, debating the media laws. It would have been a fascinating conversation and one that I imagine went over many, many days.
Well, I mean, Josh is good on the phone, and that's one of his great strengths. That he's a great connector and he's a great guy. And I think he's a terrific leader, actually, Josh. And I love working with him. And I'm sure that he burnt Zuckerberg's phone up, and that's all good. And but the thing is, right? I mean that we just had to win that argument because the threats and the bullying, it's a bit like, the unions, coming in and threatening and bullying. But I have to say, of all the lobbying I've seen in the 2 years I've been in office, the worst lobbying I've seen, and this is apart from the big super funds, probably, with their ridiculous, newspapers like the New Daily and all that, would have come from the big tech companies who would sort of, come around to your office and sort of say they thought that Josh was corrupt and, I sort of had to remind them where they were and really kind of grubby stuff.
Do you think, was it ever a real contemplation that we might have had an Australian society without Google and Facebook?
Oh, look, I think we were happy to let, Google leave and, leave with their millions of dollars of advertising revenue, which would go to someone else like Bing.
Bing.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Facebook, I mean, they didn't threaten to leave the country, but they threatened to take things off their platform. And so be it. I mean, people would have to go elsewhere to see that information. So I just think we had to show that we weren't going to be bullied. We weren't. I mean, I see now also in France, they've got similar laws, and the rest of the world will follow us, right? I mean, at the moment, the ACCC is doing a review into digital wallets and looking at, how these platforms manifest and how they are going to grow in terms of their importance. And if Apple is going to go into buy now, pay later and become a bank and run digital wallets and have the hardware and the software, we're getting into the railroads and oil companies in the 21st century pretty quickly. So, and the question for us as your representatives in Canberra is, well, what sort of laws are we going to put in place to maximise dynamism and technology? Because I mean, these are all good things, right? But we don't want to see concentration of power because we believe in fair and free markets. So these are becoming very, very big.
Absolutely. And tech obviously has so many different arms into society. The financial technology is obviously a big one and one that I'm fairly passionate about. So interested in some of your views on that, and particularly, and before we move on to some of the work you've done through your books, how do you start to regulate things like crypto, the huge growth in some of these trading apps where they're encouraging millennials to effectively bet on the market, and at the same time create a stable and well-functioning financial services industry? The two seem to be at odds with each other, and interested to understand how the government's thinking about it.
Well, I mean, it's totally unregulated pretty much. I mean, apart from the fact that we have digital currency exchanges which are regulated under AUSTRAC, which appears to be a pretty light level of regulation, I have to say. I mean, this is totally the Wild West. So, I mean, I was reading some submissions yesterday, and there's an organisation called Finder, which you know, and that's said that 17% of Australians own cryptocurrency. Now, that is a very high number of Australians, and I'm sure that's predominantly amongst younger people. So, I mean, we can talk about this all we want, but this is happening. And so my view is we need to be looking at what sort of appropriate regulation we should have in this place, not, we don't want to think about it, it's too hard, it's too risky. I mean, it's happening. People are going to do it. The question for the proponents of digital assets is, what is the value it's going to deliver Australia? Now, I think it's Hamish Douglas is talking about there being no value. That may be the case. I don't know. We'll test that proposition. But I would have thought in relation to things like stable coins and the like, I mean, there could be some value, more efficiency. So let's see. I mean, the point is we can't close ourselves off as a country to these things.
And I think that's an interesting point you raised, because Bitcoin and Ethereum and the speculative nature of the currency or the crypto seems to get mixed up with the actual underlying technology, which inevitably is going to have some value. And we're seeing some great applications already within financial services, not to mention every other industry. So it's about getting that balance.
Yeah. So are you able to get access to crypto through your platform?
We do have some investments for sophisticated investors where they're offered via IM funds. And there's also been, I think, a number of ETFs that have been listed on the exchange recently. But as far as crypto as an asset class, I think we're probably taking a conservative view, and I can't see it making an appearance in the next year or two.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is the first time I've sort of made any comments about this, but I mean, like where my thinking is, and I'm not inclined to be one of those sort of government people that sort of sets a view and then never moves. I mean, I think in this space you've got to be iterative. And you've got to be open with your thoughts and be prepared to move. But like my current thinking is we don't really have a fulsome licensing regime for markets. We have no regime for products. We have no regime, by products, I mean tokens and assets. We don't really have we have no system for custody. But this has been possible in the UK and Singapore and the US state of Wyoming. So we want to make sure that we're not going to be disrupted. We want to make sure that we investigate the viability of having this form of regulation, because as I said, Matt, this is already happening. Now, if Finder's figures are right and 17% of Australians are already in there, then surely we want to have a framework. So that is where I'm sort of currently thinking. And throughout the month of August 2021, we'll be having public hearings into this, and we'll be hearing from the market exchanges, the asset managers, various people. But we want to also hear from people who have advice to us on what's the best way to protect consumers, because I think that regulation could be a good thing for the people who believe in crypto, but it could also be a good thing for consumer protection.
Absolutely. When you see people piling into Dogecoin off the back of Elon Musk's tweet, again, it's all about finding that balance and trying to make sure that you can protect the savings of Australia, but also allow them to participate.
Yeah, and I just think, like, as you know, we'll get blamed if we don't have a proper system, because that's the Australian way, right? Blame the government.
And as far as making Australia more competitive from a tech perspective, I think we're really struggling as a nation to retain talent, but also to attract talent. And we're certainly seeing that in our own business and a lot of businesses that we talk to. What does Australia need to do to have more successes like your Afterpays on the global market? Is there much thought around that at the moment?
Look, I think being competitive is the same for being competitive in fintech, tech, and as a country. So it's how flexible your labour laws are, it's how competitive your tax settings are, it's how dynamic and movable your policy settings are. I mean, we've deployed measures like having early stage venture capital funds and early stage innovation company structures. Now, these are things that we've deployed because we want to try and get more capital into the country, into these sort of spaces. But we've got to be open-minded about changing it all the time. So it runs against the conventional wisdom in government, but we may need to update these company structures every 2 years.
Yeah, because certainly when you speak to some of the big tech companies from overseas, whenever they contemplate coming to Australia, they do. First thing they look at is our labour laws, and they typically balk and run home very quickly. So that certainly seems to be a big problem. But as well as making sure that, I guess, people looking at Australia see it as a place of opportunity, that they can come and make their fortunes or make an impact.
Yeah, so we've done well. I mean, companies are coming to list on the ASX. Tech companies are coming to list on the ASX. So the fintech thing has worked. I mean, we are now strong in fintech, and it's not just Afterpay and Zip. It's also, you know, Air Wallets and Safety Culture and a whole lot of other companies that you know well. So that's been a great success for us. And the way to build on that is to keep on evolving these schemes, because I mean it has been a bit of a partnership. I mean, and the PM and you know, also going back to Turnbull and Josh Frydenberg have all worked together on this agenda of making sure that Australia was strong in fintech. And the reason the reason that we believe in fintech as liberals is two. The first is we want consumers to have more choice. And the second thing is we want to have more tech jobs. And the third reason is, you know, we're not here to run a protection racket for the incumbents. We're not here to try and run an agenda for, you know, the people that I used to work with at the FSC. We're here to run an agenda for the people that elect us to public office. And I have to say, you know, because you've asked me about it, you know, some people say, well, you know, have you lost some friends from, you know, your FSC days? And I mean, some people probably a bit disappointed they didn't run their lines, as we say in the business. But I mean, seriously, I mean, in a democracy, do you really want people to go into public office and then just run the agenda of a vested interest? I mean, we see it every day across the aisle. I don't want to be too political about this, but I mean, Labor has stacked its ranks with union officials, and often it's quite confusing about whether or not they're talking about the interest of their voters they represent, or the people at the super funds, or the people at the union, right? And I just like to be very clear that I'm there to represent the workers who elect me to federal parliament. And I know that people want more choice, which I assume is why, you know, you've been successful with your ventures at Netwealth, because you're giving people choice.
That's probably a fantastic segue to your second book, Bad Eggs, where you've shared some fairly strong views on how you think the super system should be structured now and into the future. Love to hear your overarching comments on where you see the biggest opportunities, if you like.
Well, Matt, I mean, the reason I wrote Bad Egg was to put out a manifesto on what was wrong with super, because, you know, you get sick of people whinging and whining about stuff and then not putting any ideas on the table. And I'm a bit of a risk taker, so I thought I'd better do it quickly. And look, the key point is super is actually a good idea, but it's just not working for the people it's supposed to work for. It's working for the unions and the financial institutions. You know, the fees are too high. There's too much wastage. And we're not getting people off the pension. I mean, who could conceive of a government scheme which is intergenerational, which costs the taxpayer more and more every year? and never delivers a net saving to the Commonwealth. Never. I mean, even the latest intergenerational report, which was released in early July 2021, shows that the cost of super will only increase until 2060. So I want the scheme to work, and I think there's a few things we should be doing to make it work. Now, part of that is the laws we passed recently, Your Future, Your Super, which will put in place a best financial interest test, so no more wasting money. It will staple funds, so no more multiple accounts. And it will also put in place performance testing. I mean, who could be against performance testing? I mean, what are people afraid of? But there is more we should do there, and I think we should be moving into having a better, cleaner system. I mean, I think we should be trying to put in place a simple national default fund, which could be run by the Future Fund, and that's something that I'm pursuing at the moment.
And are you concerned at all about the state of the insurance industry, which has suffered as a result of some of the new regulations?
Well, I just think the whole idea of having super and insurance together is quite confused. I mean, as you know, the experts would say that a lot of the insurance policies, the group insurance policies, are junk policies. They won't give people enough support if there's a major life event. I mean, in Sydney, where you've got an average house price of over $1 million, you know, if you're a working person with a couple of kids and a Sydney mortgage and you die in your 30s or 40s, I mean, $100,000 is not going to do very much. And so I'm concerned that it's creating apathy, that people are saying, oh, I don't need to see a financial planner and get the right level of retail insurance. Or that, I mean, people don't call it retail insurance, but you know what I mean, you know, an individually advised insurance. So I think insurance is a good product. I think people should be trying to get individually advised insurance. I like financial advice, and you know, I practice what I preach. I see a financial planner myself, and these are the things that I talk about with my planner, and it's insurance and asset allocation. And I know that if I was relying on the whatever's in the super fund, then that wouldn't be the right thing for me. So
Before we bring you the second part of this chat, a little bit about who we are. Celebrating over 20 years, NetWealth is an ASX-listed company that has been rated number 1 for overall user satisfaction by Investment Trends for 8 consecutive years in their Planner Technology Report. As the financial advice landscape changes, it's important to embrace new technology to enhance the way you run your business. With change comes your chance to innovate, explore new perspectives, and realize new efficiencies. NetWealth is here to support you on this journey by providing you market-leading technology, excellent customer support, and expertise to help your business thrive. Contact us today or visit the NetWealth website to learn more and get the PDS, which should be read before making a decision to purchase a NetWealth product. Products issued by NetWealth Investments Limited.
the problem with advice is though that it's become too expensive. I mean, it's prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, and there's clearly been a huge amount of regulation being pushed through over the last couple of years, fee consent being the most recent major part of that. The Hayne Royal Commission is now in the background. Do you see that with the new regulation, advisor numbers dropping, that advice can become more affordable in the future? And how do you see that happening?
Well, the question is, how do we cut the cost of advice, and how do we make it a more viable industry? And I think that's a question I'd ask to you and your podcasters. I mean, people should get in touch with me and give me their ideas. I mean, one thing we did do was we changed one of the Hayne recommendations so we could allow people to deduct the cost of advice from their MySuper default product, because I mean that is, and look, to be honest with you, I mean that's how I will pay for advice and it's how I pay for insurance, because that is the only viable option some people have. And I think if it's good advice, there's no problem with taking it from your super. I think that's, I'm happy to publicly defend that. So I mean, people should get in touch with their ideas about how we could cut the costs of advice.
Yeah, and I think we've just completed some research of our own, which is suggesting there's, particularly in the emerging affluent or that sort of millennial market, who are now probably through trading apps and crypto more connected to their money than any other generation. 2.2 million Australians are open and looking for advice. However, the cost of advice is going to be a deterrent every time. So it's about how do you make it affordable and ensure that they can pay for it from money that may or may not be going towards their mortgage, for example.
Yeah, and I think, we also want to have a more flexible system, right? And I think the idea of allowing people to access their super for a first home, I think, is a good idea and one we should pursue, and one that I will be continuing to pursue over the long run. So, I mean, just to put three ideas on the table. I mean, one idea is, which would improve the super system, would be to have the future fund as a default fund. I think people would buy into that. It doesn't mean people will be trapped. People could still choose to go with net wealth or go into a platform. I mean, I use a platform myself and think they're good structures. Obviously, lots of people want to use an SMSF. Fine. I mean, the great thing about early release scheme, Matt, was that it made people realise that super is real money. I think it was very engaging. So I think we should keep on pursuing that. Second issue is we should definitely look at allowing super for first home ownership. I mean, if you are retired and renting and you're on the pension, you're going to have a pretty tough retirement. And I think the whole system has been geared around this idea that Australians will own a home. But for millennials and Gen Z, that is not always going to be the case, right? And those numbers you've referred to are very, very troubling. So I still think under the Australian system, home ownership is the bedrock of financial security in retirement. And the third policy issue for us to discuss, and I welcome your thoughts on this, and your podcasters, is how do we cut the cost of advice? How do we do that?
Technology is the obvious answer, but it's not the only answer. And I think it's multifaceted, particularly if you're going to be providing that high-end advice that so many Australians actually need.
Yeah. So is that something that you provide licensed advice through NetWealth?
No, we don't. No. So we exited advice probably 3 or 4 years ago now, and realised we were better to stick to what we were good at.
Yeah.
And Robo, what are you seeing? Are you seeing any green shoots there as far as real solutions to advice problems?
Well, I guess the question is, what can the regulatory framework withstand? What does it currently permit? And people should let me know what they think it should be able to do. I mean, it's a very prescriptive regime that's been put in place through FOFA and now through the Hayne Royal Commission. That there's more regulation there than you can poke a stick at, and that is been done for consumer protection purposes. But it sort of runs counter to how we would run a legislative regime which is pro technology and pro accessibility. So, I mean, people shouldn't feel backwards in coming forwards. I mean, the front door for me, by the way, for people who are listening, is just to send an email to senator.bragg@aph.gov.au, and very much welcome the views of people, even if you're from Victoria. That's okay, and that's a good way to deal with it. I mean, I think we're probably now at a point where we can have a more sensible conversation now that we've bedded down all the Hayne Royal Commission recommendations. And look, I mean, I hear from advisors a lot around Sydney about they're unhappy with what's happened with the government implementing the Hayne Royal Commission. But I mean, that was an election commitment that we made, that we would implement the Hayne recommendations, and we have to stick to the commitments we make to the Australian people.
Do you think we're going to see a period now of less regulation, given a lot of the heavy lifting's been done?
We need to make the case. So I guess the first point is what is the value? I hate to use these sort of wanky words, but what is the value proposition of advice? Now, for me, it would be a better future, a stronger retirement, getting access to that special advice, and sort of establishing that as a useful commodity for the community. The second part is, what are the barriers that are holding back people from getting advice? Because I mean, this is not about the very rich people. I mean, very, very rich people can afford advice. This is about people in the middle income earners in particular getting access to advice. I mean, obviously, lower income earners and middle income earners can use the intra-fund advice, but that is a model which is designed for a particular commercial reason, to sort of lock people into a particular product, which I'm quite sceptical about. So the answer to your question, Matt, is I think we're now in a position where we can start opening up some of these debates because we've bedded down all the changes that we said that we would.
Fair to say that you've tackled and in the process of tackling some fairly big issues. So you've been in office now, is it 2 years?
Yeah, 1st of July 2019, yeah.
2019. You've tackled super. you're tackling fintech and crypto, and at the same time, you've just released a new book also on the future or the pathway for Indigenous affairs. How do you see that playing out? Because that's probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, issue that we're facing as a country now.
Well, I mean, I'm not a Indigenous person, but I'm, an Australian-born person. I can only ever be Australian, and I love Australia. And it's troubled me that we haven't been able to reconcile with Indigenous people. And it's troubled me that, the foundations of Australia were very, legally, I think, questionable. And this legitimacy question has dogged the country. And there are practical concepts on the table through the Uluru Statement that I think that we should champion and we should deliver on. And so I have written a book which is the liberal case for reconciliation, which includes the Uluru Statement at its heart, Matt. And it is something that I'm very passionate about, and because I love Australia, I want Australia to be reconciled. I'm troubled that we haven't made good on our commitments in this space. And how can any Australian be comfortable with the gaps that Indigenous people face in terms of economic agency, life expectancy, what have you? So there is a symbolic and a practical need for us to address these issues, and I'm personally committed to it. I mean, one of the things I've noticed is that, when you talk to minorities, they just get it. I mean, minorities get other minorities, I think, better than perhaps the majority does. And anyway, so the answer is I think there's a strong liberal case for Uluru and reconciliation, and I'm committed to it.
Fantastic. For those that are interested in finding out more on your views on those two topics, where's the best place to download your book? Is it on Kindle, or how do they get it?
Yeah, so I mean, look, Baraja is the book. So that is you can get that on Amazon Kindle. You can buy it as an audio book, which I personally narrated on Audible. Which I have to say, recording an audio book is much harder than you think. I mean, I spent 3 days in a cold studio in East Sydney trying to record it, and it's for 7 hours of words, and I spent a lot of time trying to get the pronunciation right. But or you can buy it online at Booktopia or whatever. So so I'd encourage people to have a look at that. I think it's my serious attempt as a non-Indigenous person to set out the arguments for reconciliation.
Fantastic, and should be commended for that. Interested in your comments on recording your own Audible book too. So I try and listen to 1 or 2 books a week, and the only way that you can do that is at about 1.4 times. So I'll be fascinated to hear what you sound like at that speed.
Really? Geez. Okay. Well, I'll have to send you the link. Yeah, it's good, but I mean, the whole point of this is, in my party, we haven't had a great tradition of people writing books, but I think writing books, although it may seem like a yesteryear thing, is a really useful way to get down your ideas. And I have to say that, good writing is actually good thinking, because it makes you really test the proposition. And I think this works for anyone doing any job, that, committing your ideas to paper really is a useful thing to do. And I think in this day and age, I mean, I'm 37. I mean, I've grown up with phones, and I probably have a bit of a propensity just to sort of stick to WhatsApps and text messages and stuff. But it is a really useful. I don't want to get into sort of paternalism here, Matt, but I mean, I think it is a really useful thing I found of committing yourself to paper. It's good.
And are you reading any books at the moment that you would recommend?
I am. I've just come out of a non-reading period. I'm reading. So I've just read Stan Grant's book, With the Falling of the Dusk, which is about China and the Middle East, and where we are in terms of geopolitics and our world and where we sit as Australia. Really easy read. And then I'm reading another book called How Democracies Die, which is about how we must, particularly as people in parliamentary politics, keep crazy people away from legitimacy. And they use Trump as a sort of a demagogue and quite a dangerous person. And I think after the insurrection you saw in January this year, the Capitol riots, I think that had proven to be true. So I don't just read about politics and history, but I am naturally drawn to that.
Fantastic. Senator Bragg, you've been very upfront and very open with your thoughts on a whole range of topics at the moment. I think the listeners should take advantage of your offer and certainly email you if they have any thoughts, concerns, or issues. And I wish you all the best for future endeavours. I have no doubt that we'll continue to hear a lot from you.
We didn't get to discuss football, so who do you go for?
I'm a Geelong man, so it's a little bit controversial at the moment, given the recent COVID outbreak and where it all happened.
Well, I'm a Geelong man too, so I think we're looking okay with those recruits we pulled on this year. So hopefully we can go one better in 2021.
Hopefully we can actually get to a game in person.
Yeah, but I think we made a mistake in letting Ablett retire last year. I think that was a big mistake.
Indeed.
Yeah. Thanks a lot,
Senator Bragg. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to this episode of Between Meetings. For more episodes and to subscribe to our series, visit the NetWealth website, iTunes, Spotify, or your favourite listening service. And if you want to contact me or engage or discuss any of the topics raised, please find me on LinkedIn or Twitter or send me a private message. We hope you can tune into the next episode.